The jungle was alive with sounds that night. Insects buzzed in the thick humidity while small animals rustled through the undergrowth. Sergeant Takashi Yamamoto moved silently through the darkness, his rifle held tight against his chest. Behind him, 23 other Japanese soldiers followed in single file. They were the best night fighters in the Imperial Army, or so their commander had told them before this mission. That it was August 1942, and the battle for Guadalcanal had been raging for weeks. The Americans had landed on this small island in the Solomon Chain, and now they controlled the airfield. Tokyo had ordered immediate action. The airfield must be taken back at any cost. Private Chun walked behind Takashi, trying to match the sergeant's careful footwork. This was Chin's first real battle. He was only 19 years old, fresh from training camp in Osaka. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped his rifle. The weight of his bayonet felt heavy on the end of the barrel. "Stay close," Takashi whispered over his shoulder. "When we charge, scream as loud as you can. The Americans fear our spirit attacks." Chin nodded in the darkness. He had heard the stories. Japanese soldiers were unstoppable in close combat. Their willingness to die for the emperor terrified the enemy. A bayonet charge could break any defensive line. At least, that was what his instructors had taught him. Lieutenant Nakamura raised his fist, and the column stopped. They were now only 300 meters from the American positions. Through the trees, Chun could see faint lights. He could hear voices speaking in English, though he could not understand the words. Takashi checked his watch. It was nearly midnight. The attack would begin in 10 minutes. Around them, hundreds of other Japanese soldiers were moving into position. This would be a massive assault designed to overwhelm the Americans through sheer numbers and fighting spirit. The sergeant remembered the battles in China. There, the enemy had broken and run when Japanese forces charged. Even well-armed Chinese troops could not stand against the fury of imperial soldiers willing to die. Takashi expected tonight would be the same. "Fixe bayonet," Lieutenant Nakamura whispered. The order passed down the line. Chun attached his bayonet with shaking hands. The blade was 17 inches long, sharp enough to pierce through bone. He tried to steady his breathing like they taught him in training. Fear was natural, his instructor had said, but a soldier must push through it. The minutes crawled by like hours. Mosquitoes bit at Chin's neck, but he did not dare move to swat them away. Sweat ran down his face despite the night coolness. His heart pounded so hard he worried the Americans might hear it. Then Lieutenant Nakamura stood up and raised his sword. "For the Emperor!" he screamed. "Banzai!" 24 voices erupted at once. Chun found himself running forward, screaming until his throat hurt. All around him, hundreds of Japanese soldiers burst from the jungle, their voices combining into a terrifying roar. This was it. This was the glorious charge that would break the enemy. They covered 50 meters. Then 75. Chun could see American helmets now, see soldiers scrambling behind sandbags and logs. Then the night exploded. A sound erupted that Chun had never heard before. It was not the crack of rifles or the pop of pistols. This was something else entirely. A deep, rhythmic thunder that hammered at his ears. BM, 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 BM. So fast the individual shots blended together into one continuous roar. Streaks of fire cut through the darkness. Tracer rounds, glowing orange and red, created lines that looked like deadly fingers reaching out from the American positions. Where these lines touched, men fell. Lieutenant Nakamura was running ahead when his body suddenly jerked. He spun completely around and collapsed. 3 other soldiers near him went down in the same instant. The sound was everywhere now. Multiple guns, all firing at once, creating a wall of noise that drowned out even the screams. The deep thunder shook Chin's chest, made his teeth rattle that a tree trunk next to him exploded in a shower of splinters. Chin saw the trunk was as thick as his torso, but whatever hit it had torn completely through. Chunks of wood flew like shrapnel. A soldier running past took splinters to the face and fell screaming. Takashi grabbed Chin's arm and yanked him down behind a fallen log. "Get down! Get down!" the sergeant was shouting, but Chun could barely hear him over the terrible hammering. More men were falling with every second. The charging soldiers were now scrambling for any cover they could find. The glorious assault had turned into desperate survival. Bodies lay everywhere, some still moving, most not. Chun risked a look over the log. In the darkness, he could see muzzle flashes from the American positions. But these were not normal muzzle flashes. They were enormous, spitting long tongues of flame. The guns themselves seemed huge, mounted on heavy stands. Another burst of fire ripped through the jungle. The log they hid behind shuddered as rounds slammed into it. Chun pressed himself flat against the ground, praying to every god he knew. The attack lasted less than 5 minutes, but it felt like hours. When silence finally fell, Chen's ears were ringing so badly he could barely hear. Smoke drifted through the trees. The smell of blood and gunpowder filled the air. "Fall back," someone was crying out in Japanese. "Fall back." Takashi pulled Chun to his feet. Together, they stumbled back into the jungle, leaving the dead and wounded behind. Of their platoon of 24 men, only 8 made it back to the rally point. As they collapsed in exhaustion, Chun heard other survivors talking in shocked whispers. The same phrase kept repeating, passed from soldier to soldier like a dark prayer. Akuma Nobuki, the devil's weapon. Chun did not know what those guns were, but he knew he never wanted to face them again. In one night, everything he had learned about Japanese superiority in battle had been shattered by the terrible thunder of American machine guns. The war, he realized with growing horror, was going to be much different than anyone had told him. Corporal Jake Morrison wiped sweat from his forehead and checked his ammunition belt one more time. The metal links felt solid in his hands, each one holding a round bigger than his thumb. Around him, other Marines were digging deeper into their positions, piling more sandbags, preparing for what everyone knew was coming. It was 3 hours before midnight on Guadalcanal. Intelligence had warned them that Japanese forces would attack tonight. They always attacked at night. The Japanese were good at it, maybe the best in the world at jungle fighting after dark. But Jake had something they did not. He patted the massive gun in front of him with genuine affection. The Browning M250 caliber machine gun. Some Marines called it Ma Deuce. Others called it the 50. Jake just called it beautiful. "You nervous?" Private Tommy Chin asked. Tommy was Jake's assistant gunner, responsible for feeding ammunition and helping change the barrel when it got too hot. Every time, Jake admitted, he was from a small town in Texas where the biggest excitement was Friday night football games. Now, he was sitting in a jungle on the other side of the world, waiting to kill men he had never met. Of course, he was nervous. Sergeant Davis walked along the line, checking each position. He stopped at Jake's gun and nodded with approval. "This position is going to be key tonight, Morrison. When they come, they will come hard. Your job is to break them before they reach our line." "Yes, Sergeant," Jake replied. Davis pointed at the gun. "You remember your training?" Jake did. 3 months ago, he had been at Camp Pendleton in California, learning everything about the M2. The instructors had drilled the specifications into their heads until everyone could recite them in their sleep. The gun weighed 84 pounds, not counting the tripod. It fired 50 caliber rounds at a rate of 450 to 600 per minute. Each bullet was half an inch wide and nearly 6 inches long. The effective range was over 2,000 yards, more than a mile. It could punch through engine blocks, concrete walls, and light armor. This weapon, one instructor had said, can stop anything short of a tank. Use it right, and nothing gets past you. Jake had practiced for hours, learning to control the powerful recoil, to fire in short bursts to keep the barrel from overheating, to clear jams quickly. The M2 was reliable, but any machine gun could fail if not properly maintained. He and Tommy had cleaned every part twice today. Now, as darkness fell completely, Jake loaded the first belt. He had a mix of ammunition types. Every 5th round was a tracer, which burned bright as it flew, letting him see where his shots were going. The others were armor-piercing incendiary rounds, designed to penetrate and then burn whatever they hit. "Here," Tommy said, handing Jake a pair of thick gloves. "For the barrel change." Jake tucked them into his belt. When firing continuously, the M2's barrel could get hot enough to melt. They had a spare barrel ready, and with practice, 2 men could swap it in under a minute. The hours dragged on. Midnight came and went. Some of the younger Marines started to relax, thinking maybe intelligence had been wrong. Maybe the Japanese would not attack tonight. After all, Jake knew better. His hand stayed on the gun's grips, his thumbs near the trigger. He kept scanning the dark jungle ahead, watching for any movement. At T-1240 in the morning, he heard it. Faint at first, then growing louder. Voices screaming in Japanese. The sound of hundreds of men running through the jungle. Here they come. Sergeant Davis shouted. Hold your fire until I give the word. Jake's heart started pounding. Through the darkness, he could see shapes moving between the trees. Lots of shapes. More than he had expected. The screaming grew louder. Bonsai! Bonsai! The Japanese soldiers burst from the jungle tree line 75 yards away. There were so many of them, a whole wave of running men with rifles and bayonets gleaming in the starlight. Fire! Davis screamed. Jake pressed both thumbs down on the trigger. The M2 came alive with a roar that shook his entire body. The recoil was incredible, like holding onto a jackhammer, but Jake had trained for this. He leaned into it, controlling the bucking weapon, walking his fire across the charging soldiers. Through his sights, Jake saw men falling. The 50 caliber rounds did not just wound, they destroyed. A man hit in the chest simply came apart. Another lost his entire arm. The heavy bullets had so much power that they went through multiple bodies. Jake fired in bursts, just like training. 5 seconds on, 2 seconds off, to let the barrel cool slightly. Tommy fed the belt smoothly, making sure it did not tangle up and down the line. Other weapons were firing too. Rifles, carbines, a 30 caliber machine gun to Jake's left. But nothing sounded like the M2. Nothing had its deep, hammering bark. BM, BM, BAM, BM, BM. The tracers created streams of red light reaching out into the darkness. Jake watched them arc toward the enemy, each one marking 4 invisible rounds. Where the tracers went, men died. He aimed at a group, trying to take cover behind a tree. The M2's heavy rounds chewed through the trunk like it was paper. The tree shook, bark exploding in all directions, and the men behind it went down. The Japanese kept coming for about 4 minutes, wave after wave, brave men running into certain death. But no amount of courage could overcome the devastating firepower. Bodies piled up. The attack broke. Survivors stumbled back into the jungle. Cease fire, Sergeant Davis called. Jake lifted his thumbs from the trigger. His ears rang from the noise. His hands were numb from the vibration. Smoke poured from the M2's barrel, and when Tommy touched it with a rag, the cloth burst into flame. Holy, Tommy whispered, staring at the field ahead. Jake did not look. He had seen enough through his sights. Instead, he focused on checking his gun, clearing the chamber, starting the cleaning process. Later, after the sun came up, intelligence officers interrogated captured Japanese soldiers. Jake was nearby when one translator explained what the prisoners kept saying. They call it Akuma no Buki, the translator said. The devil's weapon. They're more afraid of that gun than anything else we have. Jake looked at his M2. It was just a tool, he told himself. Just a machine made of metal and springs. But as he remembered what it had done, what he had done with it, his hands began to shake. The gun was still warm to the touch. Sergeant Takashi Yamamoto stood in the morning sun on a different island, watching supply boats unload equipment on the beach. 3 months had passed since Guadalcanal. 3 months since he first heard the terrible sound of American heavy machine guns. Now he was on New Guinea, and the war was going badly. Japan was losing. Nobody said it out loud, but every soldier knew. The Americans were getting stronger while Japanese forces grew weaker. Food was scarce. Medicine was running out. Ammunition was limited. But worst of all was the growing fear in every soldier's eyes, fear of the devil's weapon. You were at Guadalcanal, yes? A young corporal asked Takashi. The boy looked barely old enough to shave. I was, Takashi replied. Is it true what they say about the American machine guns? Takashi did not answer right away. How could he explain what it was like? The sound that shook your bones. The tracers that looked like streams of fire. The way men simply disappeared when those massive bullets hit them. "It is worse than what they say," he finally said. The corporal's face went pale. Everywhere Takashi had been since Guadalcanal, he heard the same stories. On Tarawa Atoll, the Marines had landed with these heavy guns mounted on their boats. As landing craft approached the beaches, the guns had swept the defensive positions clean. Japanese soldiers who were hidden in bunkers, who should have been safe, were torn apart by bullets that punched through coconut logs and coral rock point. One survivor from Tarawa told Takashi that the American bullets were so powerful they went through 3 sandbags. 3 sandbags that would stop any normal rifle round could not stop a .50 caliber bullet. How were soldiers supposed to hide from something like that? On Bougainville, Japanese forces had tried to ambush an American patrol. They had good positions in the jungle, hidden behind thick trees. But when the Americans called in support, a truck arrived with one of the heavy guns mounted in the back. The gun fired for just 30 seconds. When it stopped, the entire ambush position was destroyed. Trees that were 2 feet thick had been cut in half. Every Japanese soldier was dead. Commander Ishikawa had studied intelligence reports from captured American documents. He briefed the officers one evening, and Takashi attended as a senior sergeant. "The weapon is called the Browning M2, Ishikawa explained, pointing to a drawing on the wall. It was designed by an American gunsmith named John Browning. It fires a .50 caliber round, which means the bullet is half an inch wide. Half an inch. Takashi thought about that. His rifle fired a round that was about a quarter inch. The American bullet was twice as big and much longer, carrying far more gunpowder. The bullet leaves the gun at 2,900 feet per second. Ishikawa continued. It carries 13,000 foot-pounds of energy. For comparison, our Type 99 rifle has only 2,700 foot-pounds, nearly 5 times more powerful. The numbers made Takashi's stomach turn. The gun can fire up to 600 rounds per minute and has an effective range of 2,000 meters. It can penetrate concrete, multiple walls, vehicle armor, and any personal cover. The Americans mounted on vehicles, boats, and aircraft. They have thousands of them. Thousands. While Japanese forces were running short of ammunition for regular rifles, the Americans had thousands of these monster weapons. "How do we fight it?" an officer asked. Ishikawa was silent for a long moment. "We avoid it when possible. When we cannot avoid it, we accept heavy casualties. There is no good tactical answer. The Americans have superior industrial production. They can build these weapons faster than we can destroy them." After the briefing, Takashi walked along the beach. Other soldiers were there, talking quietly. He heard fragments of conversation. "My cousin was at Guadalcanal. He said the sound alone made men freeze in terror. On New Britain, they call it the devil's weapon. Akuma no buki. I heard that bullets from that gun can go through a palm tree and kill a man on the other side. My unit tried a night attack last week. The Americans turned on searchlights and fired those guns. Half our company was gone in seconds." The nickname had spread through the Japanese military like wildfire. Akuma no buki, the devil's weapon. Some soldiers carried special charms blessed by priests, specifically for protection against it. Others wrote letters home mentioning their fear of the terrible American guns. Takashi had written to his wife, though he tried not to worry her. "The Americans have weapons we cannot match," he had written. "We fight with spirit and courage, but they fight with machines that do not tire, do not miss, and do not stop." Command tried to develop tactics. They ordered troops to dig deeper trenches, to use more concrete in bunkers, to attack only when American positions could be overwhelmed quickly. Nothing worked well. The M2 could fire into a trench and kill everyone inside. It could punch through bunker walls. And quick attacks just meant dying faster. Some units tried using captured American weapons, including a few M2s. But ammunition was the problem. Each gun needed the special .50 caliber rounds, and Japan could not manufacture them. The few captured guns sat useless after firing their limited ammunition supply. The psychological impact was worse than the physical casualties. Soldiers who had never faced the M2 were already afraid of it. Those who had faced it and survived were traumatized. The sound alone could trigger panic. Men who had been brave fighters became paralyzed with fear at the distinctive hammering bark of the 50 caliber point one evening. Takashi saw a young soldier sitting alone, crying. The boy was supposed to join a patrol that might encounter American positions. "I did not want to die from that weapon," the soldier said through tears. "I'm not afraid to die for the Emperor, but I am afraid of that gun. It does not just kill you, it destroys you. There is nothing left to send home to your family." Takashi had no words of comfort. The boy was right. He had seen what the 50 caliber did to human bodies. There was often nothing left to bury. As 1943 turned into 1944, the legend of Akuma no Buki grew stronger. It appeared in radio intercepts, prisoner interrogations, and captured diaries. American intelligence officers noted with interest how much Japanese soldiers feared this particular weapon. Some American units started using the fear deliberately. They would play recordings of the M2 firing before attacks, just to terrorize defenders. The psychological warfare was effective. Japanese soldiers would sometimes abandon positions just from hearing the sound. Takashi survived New Guinea and was transferred to another island. Everywhere he went, the story was the same. The Americans were advancing, island by island, and the devil's weapon led the way. The island of Iwo Jima was like nothing Private Kenji had ever seen. Black volcanic sand covered the beaches, and Mount Suribachi rose into the sky like a dark pyramid. Underground, Japanese forces had dug miles of tunnels, creating a fortress that commanders promised could never be taken down. It was February 1945. The war was nearly over, though nobody told the defenders that. Kenji had been on Iwo Jima for 2 months, helping dig the endless tunnels. He was 19 years old and terrified. His officer was Lieutenant Takashi Yamamoto, a scarred veteran with tired eyes. Takashi had fought on Guadalcanal, New Guinea, and 3 other islands. He was one of the few survivors who had faced the Americans multiple times and lived to tell about it. "Listen to me carefully," Takashi told his men the night before the Americans landed. "When you hear the sound, the deep hammering sound, you do not freeze. You do not panic. You take cover immediately and stay down until it stops. Do you understand?" "What sound, Lieutenant?" Kenji asked, though part of him already knew. "Akuma no Buki," another soldier whispered. "The devil's weapon." Kenji had heard the stories. Every soldier had. The American machine gun that fired bullets as big as fingers. The gun that could cut through trees and stone. The gun whose sound alone had broken entire battalions. That on February 19th, the American invasion began. Naval guns pounded the island for hours. Bombs fell from aircraft. The noise was so loud Kenji thought he would go deaf. But the tunnels protected them. The Japanese defenders stayed underground, waiting. Then the Marines landed on the beaches. Thousands of them, pouring from boats, spreading across the black sand. Japanese positions opened fire, but there were too many Americans. Always too many. On the 3rd day, Takashi received orders for a counterattack. 200 men would emerge from the tunnels on the northern side and hit the American positions. The goal was to push them back to the beaches. Kenji checked his rifle with shaking hands. He did not want to go. The tunnels were safe. Above ground was death. "Stay close to me," Takashi said. His voice was calm, like a father talking to his son. "When I give the signal, we attack. If you hear the heavy guns, drop flat immediately. Your life depends on it." They moved through the tunnels in darkness, climbing toward the exit. Kenji could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Ahead of him, other soldiers were praying softly. The exit was a hole disguised by rocks and brush. One by one, soldiers climbed out into daylight. Kenji emerged and saw American positions 200 yards away. Tanks, trucks, sandbags, and foxholes. So much equipment. So many vehicles. Takashi raised his sword. "For the Emperor! Charge!" 200 voices screamed at once. Kenji found himself running, his rifle held forward, bayonet fixed. This was it. This was the glorious attack that would drive the invaders back. They covered 50 yards. 75. 100. Then the world ended. The sound hit Kenji like a physical blow. That terrible, deep hammering that the veterans had warned about. BAM, 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 BAM. But it was not just one gun. It was many guns, firing from multiple positions, creating a wall of sound that drowned out everything else. Kenji saw the muzzle flashes from the American lines. Huge weapons mounted on half-tracks and behind sandbags. Flames shooting 3 feet from the barrels. The air filled with tracers, streams of fire that looked like orange lines drawn across the battlefield. Men fell everywhere. Not just falling, but torn apart. A soldier running next to Kenji simply exploded in a red mist. Another man's entire torso disappeared, leaving only legs that took 2 more steps before collapsing. Kenji froze. His legs would not move. His training, his courage, everything evaporated in the face of that terrible sound and those streams of death. Takashi grabbed him and pulled him down behind a small rise in the ground. "Stay down," the lieutenant screamed, but Kenji could barely hear him over the guns. The M2S were firing in overlapping patterns. The American gunners had set up kill zones with perfect fields of fire. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. The bullets went through rocks, through bodies, through anything in their path. Across the battlefield, Gunnery Sergeant Jake Morrison sat behind his M2, thumbs on the trigger. He was 3 years older now, harder, with more gray in his hair. This was his 4th island invasion. He knew exactly what he was doing. Target left, vehicle, his assistant gunner called. Jake swung the massive gun and fired a burst. The 50 caliber rounds punched through the side of a Japanese truck that was trying to bring reinforcements. The vehicle exploded in flames. Infantry, center mass, another Marine spotted. Jake traversed back and fired again. Through his sights, he saw Japanese soldiers trying to advance. He walked his fire across them, each burst of tracers marking death. He did not think about it anymore. This was just his job now. Next to him, 3 other M2S were firing in coordination. They had practiced this, creating interlocking fields of fire that nothing could cross. Lieutenant Rodriguez had positioned the guns perfectly. The Japanese attack lasted less than 7 minutes. When the firing stopped, over 150 bodies lay scattered across the volcanic sand. The survivors were scrambling back to their tunnels. Kenji was covered in blood, though none of it was his own. He had been lying next to a man when a 50 caliber round hit him. Now Kenji could not stop shaking. Takashi pulled him to his feet and pushed him toward the tunnel entrance. "Move! Before they start again." They stumbled back underground with perhaps 30 survivors. 200 men had attacked. 30 came back. The devil's weapon had taken the rest. That night, Kenji sat in the tunnel and cried. He could not stop hearing the sound. BAM, 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 BAM. It echoed in his head, even in the silence of the underground. "Will we die here?" he asked Takashi. The lieutenant looked at him with those tired eyes. "Probably, but we will do our duty anyway." On the surface, Jake Morrison was cleaning his gun. The barrel had to be replaced after the sustained firing. His hands worked automatically, going through the familiar motions. "We broke that attack easy," Tommy said. He was a corporal now. "Yeah," Jake replied. He did not feel good about it, just tired that a translator was questioning a captured Japanese soldier nearby. Jake heard him mention Akuma no Buki again. After all these years, all these battles, the Japanese still called it the devil's weapon. Jake looked at his M2. Maybe they were right. Maybe that was exactly what it was. The battle for Iwo Jima would last another month. The devil's weapon would fire every single day. The war ended on August 15th, 1945. Takashi Yamamoto heard the Emperor's radio broadcast from a hospital bed in Tokyo. His left arm was gone, taken by shrapnel on Iwo Jima 3 days before the island fell. He was one of only 1,000 Japanese soldiers who survived out of 21,000 defenders. Japan was destroyed. Cities burned. Millions dead. The proud empire had been crushed by American industrial might and the terrible weapons it produced. Takashi looked out the hospital window at the ruins of Tokyo and wondered if it had all been for nothing. He was 32 years old, but felt like an ancient man. When he was released from the hospital 2 months later, Takashi returned to his village in the countryside. His wife Yuki had survived, along with their daughter. They cried together for hours, holding each other in their damaged house. But peace did not mean the war was over in Takashi's mind. Every night, he dreamed of the sound. BAM, 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 BAM. The hammering of the 50 caliber guns that had killed so many of his men. He would wake up sweating, heart pounding, convinced he was back on the battlefield point one day. Construction workers came to repair a bridge near the village. They used a pneumatic hammer that made a rapid pounding noise. Takashi was walking past when the hammer started. The sound hit him like a physical blow. Suddenly, he was not in his village anymore. He was on Guadalcanal, on Iwo Jima. Hearing the devil's weapon tear apart his friends, he collapsed on the ground, covering his ears, unable to breathe. Yuki found him there an hour later, still shaking. The sound, he kept repeating. I can hear it. I can still hear it. Takashi was not alone. All across Japan, veterans gathered to share their stories and their trauma. In Tokyo, a historians group began collecting testimonies from survivors. They wanted to document the war before the memories faded. When they interviewed Takashi, he talked for 3 hours. He described every battle, every loss, every horror. And when they asked what he feared most during the war, he did not hesitate. Akuma no Buki, he said, the American 50 caliber machine gun. We called it the devil's weapon. It was worse than bombs, worse than fire, worse than anything else they had. The sound alone could break a man's courage. The historians found that phrase in hundreds of interviews. Akuma no Buki appeared in captured diaries, in radio intercepts that had been translated, in letters that soldiers wrote home. It had become part of the shared language of Japanese soldiers who fought in the Pacific. The weapon had become a symbol, not just of American firepower, but of everything Japan could not match. American industry that could produce thousands of these guns. American resources that provided unlimited ammunition. American technology that designed weapons Japan could not counter. We fought with spirit and courage, one veteran told the historians. But they fought with machines that never got tired, never got scared, and never stopped firing. How do you beat that with just spirit? Across the Pacific Ocean, Jake Morrison returned to his small town in Texas. He brought back medals, scars, and memories he wished he could forget. His family threw a welcome home party. The whole town came. Everyone wanted to shake his hand, to hear his war stories, to thank him for his service. Jake smiled and said the things they wanted to hear. But inside, he felt hollow. 18 night, alone in his childhood bedroom, he thought about what he had done. How many men had he killed? He had stopped counting after the first 100. The M2 made killing efficient, mechanical, impersonal. You just press the trigger and watch people disappear through your sights. Jake got a job at the local hardware store. Life tried to return to normal, but certain things triggered the memories. The sound of firecrackers on 4th of July. The smell of gunpowder when someone cleaned a hunting rifle. The feeling of something vibrating in his hands at a veterans gathering in 1948. Jake met a man who had worked as a translator during the war. They got talking about the Pacific Islands, the battles, the Japanese soldiers. You know what they called your gun? The translator said. The heavy machine gun you used? What? Jake asked. Akuma no Buki. It means devil's weapon in Japanese. I heard it hundreds of times in interrogations. They were absolutely terrified of that gun. Jake felt something twist in his stomach. He had known the Japanese feared it, but he had never thought about the name they gave it. The devil's weapon. He had been a man behind the devil's weapon. That night, Jake could not sleep. He kept thinking about the young Japanese soldiers he had killed. They had families too. They had towns like his town. They had dreams and fears and people who loved them. And he had cut them down with a weapon they called demonic. Was he a hero or a monster? He honestly did not know. Years passed. Both men tried to build new lives from the ashes of the old. Takashi became a teacher in his village, educating children about the dangers of war. Jake took over the hardware store when the owner retired. They lived quiet lives, trying to forget, but the memories never completely faded. A sound, a smell, a photograph could bring it all back. The jungle nights, the volcanic sand of Iwo Jima, the terrible hammering of the guns in the 1960s. Jake saw a news report about the Vietnam War. American troops were using the M2 Browning machine gun. The same weapon he had used. The same weapon John Browning designed in 1918. It was still in service, still effective, still feared. Some weapons are so good they never become obsolete, the reporter said. Jake turned off the television. He did not need to be reminded. He knew exactly how good that weapon was. He had seen what it could do. The M2 Browning remained in American military service into the 21st century. Soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan used the same basic design that had terrorized Japanese soldiers in World War II. The weapon had lasted over 80 years and showed no signs of being replaced, and on opposite sides of the Pacific, two old men lived with their memories. Takashi in his Japanese village, Jake in his Texas town. They never met. They never spoke. But they shared something that bound them together across time and distance. They both knew the truth about war. It was not glory or honor or noble sacrifice. It was horror given mechanical form. It was the sound of the devil's weapon echoing through the years, a sound that never completely stopped, not even in peace. And they both understood that the real devil was not the weapon itself. The real devil was the war that made such weapons necessary and the humans who had to use them.